What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's transfer tips for Game Week 18. So I'm going to go through some of the popular players being moved in and out of squads and discuss whether they are good moves or not. I know that Game Week 17 hasn't quite finished yet, but we've had a lot of matches already, and the next deadline is on Friday. So we've got to start looking ahead to Game Week 18. There's still some important matches to come for Game Week 17. So the likes of kind of Chelsea, Man United, and Man City in particular have still got to play. But anything that happens in those games I will cover in the rest of the videos that we'll have this week running up to that Friday deadline. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's jump into it. Alright, let's talk about Mitrovic first of all. Now, there was a few things that happened yesterday where I just thought, yeah, FPL is back, and not necessarily in a good way. We love the game, but we also hate it in equal measures. One of them was Callum Wilson, not flagged. He was in predicted lineups, suddenly missing out through illness in a game where Newcastle did really well, and they got a penalty. The other one was Mitrovic, who was flagged as a doubt, and to be fair, Marco Silva did say he was a doubt for the Crystal Palace game. The reporter asked him specifically. But there was a few days in between the press conference and the match, so obviously he was able to get fit and available for that game, but a lot of us didn't go for him because of that, because he was on 4 yellow cards, and he ends up getting 3 returns against Crystal Palace. Now, obviously, some of that was because Palace went down to 10 men, then they went down to 9 men as well, but it was a bit frustrating to see him come away with 2 assists and 1 goal, but it is what it is, and already over 100,000 FPL managers have brought him in for Game Week 18, so the question is that a good move? So in isolation, I do think that Mitrovic is a perfectly good player to bring in. I know some people are worried about the 4 yellow card situation, but I don't think it should be worrying us that much, because it's not like Game Week 19 is this massive double game week where loads of players have got 2 fixtures. It's literally just Fulham and Chelsea. So if you were to bring him in this week and he did get a yellow card against Southampton, okay, it's not ideal that he would miss the Leicester game and then he'd then have a run of Chelsea, Newcastle, Spurs and Chelsea, but it's not really that big of an issue for a player that you know is going to start. He's on penalties. Fulham do seem to like to go out and attack these big teams anyway. He's got good underlying numbers as well. If you want a forward under 7 million that you can just stick in your team and leave them, Mitrovic is pretty much perfect, because I know obviously he was a doubt going into this game. He missed a couple of games before the World Cup break, but from an injury record, he doesn't seem to be that bad, right? He does play a lot of games. We've seen it in the Championship many times. So I think he's a perfectly good option to bring in, because the upside is you bring him in for Southampton at home, he doesn't get the yellow card, he doesn't get one in the Leicester game either, and he gets that double game week. And again, the fixtures are not that easy after Leicester up until you get to Game Week 23, but he's kind of someone that you can just put in your team and just leave. Now, whether or not you should be bringing him in is a different question, because like I said, in isolation, he's a good pick, but most of you will have a pretty good forward already. So if you've got Callum Wilson, we need to wait and see what the kind of diagnosis is with him, and I'll talk about him a little bit later about whether or not we should sell him. If you've got Martial, you've not even seen him play yet. Yes, he's got Wolves away in Game Week 18 where Mitrovic has Southampton at home. So I would say Mitrovic is definitely the better pick. But if he does pick up a yellow card and miss the Leicester game, you got Mitrovic versus Chelsea at home, or potentially Martial versus Bournemouth at home. And I'd probably rather have Martial. Lots of you with Darwin Nunez as well. A lot of whether or not you should sell him depends on what your strategy is with the money. Like, you could do Nunez to Mitrovic for the double, as long as you've got a nice way to spend the extra funds. So I guess it's one of those where there's nothing wrong with bringing Mitrovic in, but we've got to treat Game Week 17 as if it's like Game Week 1. You've just built a squad for the kind of short to medium term, at least, in some cases for the long term. Do you really need to knee-jerk straight away and get Mitrovic in? Maybe you do. His price is going to go up. I know for me, for example, I worked out how much money I had in the bank for future moves, and I'm not sure I can afford that extra 0.1, so maybe I'll have to move early. So I'm not against doing it, but I think a lot of you have got squads and decent forwards where you don't necessarily need to rush into it. You could see whether he gets the yellow in the Southampton game, and then reassess whether you want him for Game Week 19 onwards or not. So there hasn't actually been a huge amount of knee-jerking when it comes to transfers just yet for Game Week 18. I guess we're still in the Christmas period, so maybe people aren't quite as focused on FPL. There's still a few games to go in Game Week 17 as well. So as an example, Darwin Nunez has only been transferred out by just over 27,000 FPL managers, but I wanted to talk about him because I did see quite a bit of frustration from last night. There was a lot of support as well, but definitely some frustration because of the amount of chances he had, but the fact he came away with just 2 points, although he was man of the match for that game apparently, right? So let's talk about it. Now, it'd be very easy to sit here and just rattle off the expected data numbers, which I am going to talk about, but they're not the only thing to consider with Nunez. So 0.76 expected goals per 90, 0.3 expected assists. They are really, really good numbers. I think the problem is that people are talking about him as a player that's got good numbers, but doesn't get any actual returns. And I've seen quite a few comparisons start off now with Timo Werner, for example. And he's only on 4.2 points per game, and we shouldn't forget that he is 9 million, so it's not like he's cheap either. But if we take a look at this tweet that I put out this morning, he's got actual returns. It's not that he just has good expected data numbers and doesn't get actual returns. He does. So far this season, he's played in 20 matches, and let's not forget that some of those would have been off the bench as well, and he's got 9 goals and 4 assists. So that's 13 attacking returns in 20 matches. Now, that alone is pretty good, but that has come from just 1,119 minutes. Now, if he'd played 90 minutes in all of those games, that would have been 1,800 minutes. So he would have had even more returns. I'm pretty sure of that. Now, you can turn around and say, yeah, but that's part of the problem. He doesn't have the minutes. And yes, that was the case earlier on in the season when Jota was fit and when Diaz was fit as well. That's not the case right now. And Darwin Nunez's minutes are going to be good because those players are out injured. Now, there's a few factors to consider there. When will Firmino be back? Because that will be a competition for the number 9 spot. And they have just signed Gakpo now. I know Man United were in for him, but looks like Liverpool have got the deal over the line. They're very good at getting those deals done quickly. But if you look at where he's played mostly, that is off the left. And given that Diaz and Jota are out for a little while, I think Diaz is out until March. Jota maybe not quite as long, but given the amount of games they've got in January alone, Gakpo's going to get a lot of minutes. I think it could be like the Diaz signing when he just comes in straight away, straight in that team, and possibly has an instant impact. And I think we're going to see a lot of Gakpo, Nunez, and Salah. Whether or not it will work, we'll have to see. And how many minutes Firmino gets when he's fit, we'll have to take a look at that as well. But until those two things happen, Nunez is going to continue playing. And as you can see from those stats taken from transfer, this isn't expected data, this is actual returns, and he's doing really well. 5 goals, 8 assists in 11 Premier League games from just 694 minutes. And I get it, right? You watch a game last night, like last night, where he could have had 2 or 3 goals and come away with a hat-trick, and you get a massive green arrow, and it doesn't happen. But that happens in FPL, so I wouldn't knee-jerk too quickly on Darwin Nunez. So I would probably hold. Obviously, each of you will know individually why you got him in the first place and what the plan was. When I looked at teams with him, my kind of general thought was that I would have him for 17 and 18, and then in game week 19 I would probably sell him to Mitrovic if you didn't start with him. I know a lot of people have got Haaland, Nunez and Martial. So Martial to Mitrovic is probably the play for you, in which case you can just keep holding Nunez. But for me, it was possibly to sell him to Mitrovic and then use that money to boost my midfield or maybe boost my defence instead. So it's really going to depend on your team and what your thought process is. But if you've got the other players you want and you've got a route to maybe get to Mitrovic, you've got a few Man City players, Chelsea players for their double, I don't see why you would get rid of him just yet. He does need to perform for 9 million, but he's pretty much done it already. So I think you hold for now. I wouldn't think about selling, especially against a Leicester team that have just conceded a bunch of goals to Newcastle. So I know a lot of forwards are featured in this video, but we've got to discuss Callum Wilson as well. He missed game week 17. The reason given was illness. That was the same reason, I believe, for the matches just before the World Cup break as well. So maybe he's not injury prone anymore. Maybe he's just illness prone instead. Who knows? But we're going to have to wait and see what Eddie Howe says. Now, I can tell you as someone that owns him, if you watched the deadline stream yesterday, I was kind of at one point trying to figure out if I could afford Darwin Nunez. Then I wanted to go a bit cheaper. It was Mitrovic, who was obviously a doubt, Martial and Wilson. I ended up on Wilson. My kind of thoughts are, my initial thoughts anyway, I'll see what happens in the rest of the games, is to keep him if I can for a few reasons. My number one target if I sell him is Mitrovic, and I would say that yes, he's got a good fixture with Southampton at home, but Wilson's got Leeds at home, and if Mitrovic did get that yellow card in game week 18, I'm not sure that I would make the switch, because if we come back and look at Newcastle's fixtures, if Mitrovic misses the Leicester game, he would then have Chelsea in game week 19, where Wilson has got Arsenal. I would say, I mean, you could argue the Chelsea fixture is a little bit easier, but neither fixture is an out-and-out great fixture. But the fixtures afterwards for Newcastle are really good. Fulham at home, Palace away, West Ham at home, and then Bournemouth away. I'd much rather that than the fixtures we saw earlier for Mitrovic. So I'm keen on keeping him if I can. Also, we've just wildcarded, and I always like, if I can, to roll a transfer the next week, especially when we've got possible double game week announcements coming. Now, I will say they're not guaranteed. I need to keep reiterating that. But if they do happen, it's better to be in a position where you've got transfers to use than not. So I'm going to do everything I can to keep hold of him for Leeds at home. And I think that should probably be the case for most owners, whether you're on a 2 up front or a 3 up front, because who would you go for the same price? Solanke, possibly, but I don't think you're in a rush to get him no matter what he does against Chelsea tonight. You've got Tony. I think a lot of people are worried about what might happen with the kind of, betting charges and stuff like that. And to be fair, Tony has just done really well again in another tough fixture. And soon Brentford have a really nice run of fixtures, but so does Wilson. So if we can, we should probably look to keep him. And then the other option is probably Mitrovic or Martial. And I think the later you bring Martial in, the worse an option he becomes, because obviously you've already missed the game in game week 17. Then it's Wolves away in game week 18, which is not as good as Leeds at home or Southampton at home. And then, yes, they have Bournemouth, Man United in game week 19. But after that, it's City and Arsenal. So there's no real rush to go and get him either. So I can see why people are already frustrated that you got him. Newcastle did well. They got a penalty with inside the minute. They're just rubbing salt into the wounds, right? Really. Like, he misses out in a fixture, there's going to be goals. Then they get a penalty. It is what it is. But I would try and keep hold of him. We'll need to wait and see what Eddie Howe says, and I will do a final thoughts video when I've heard from his press conference for game week 18. I think if he's positive that he's going to play or going to be available, and he doesn't put any doubt like we're going to have to assess him or we're still looking at him and stuff like that, then I'll probably keep him, because I think even if Ben White had to come off the bench, it's not the end of the world. But if he does put doubt on it and he does say something like, we're not sure, we're going to have to assess, he's still not feeling great, then I will probably just sell him, and I probably will just go straight to Mitrovic and take that risk, because I might need the money for further moves later on anyway. I just don't think I would go straight to Tony. So the kind of summary is, I would try and keep him if you can. They've got a really nice fixture run. Game week 18 is good. He's nailed. He's on penalties. He just has to stay fit, or has to stay illness free. Let me know what you're doing in the comments below. So Odegaard proving really popular ahead of game week 18. He's already been brought in by over 30,000 FPL managers. His total ownership is now 17%, and for good reason. He was great against West Ham last night. I don't know who got man of the match, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was him. He came away with 2 assists, and I've got to say, I got it slightly wrong at the start of the season. Now, I didn't write Odegaard off, but I did think that Martinelli and Saka were probably better options. And to be fair, it has been really close. It's not like Odegaard is miles in front. But I think the thing that I did get wrong was I thought he'd be the kind of assister or the creator in that team. But when you look at the underlying numbers, his goal threat is higher than his kind of chances created, right? His expected goals are 0.35 per 90, and his expected assists are 0.28. So he's just an all-round great option. So there's kind of 2 things I want to talk about here. If you've got a midfield slot free and you need to make a transfer for whatever reason, I know most people don't because we've just had a wild card, but if you do and you've got an Arsenal slot free and you want to go for Odegaard, great, he's a brilliant option. So that's one thing out of the way. The other thing I want to talk about is those that are kind of put off by, doubling or even tripling up on Arsenal because of the fixtures. Because Brighton away, Newcastle at home, Spurs away, Man United at home, and maybe even Everton away to a certain extent, don't necessarily look that good on paper. But I think we need to change the way we think about Arsenal players. So I'm going to try and get my point across with these numbers, okay? So I've got the expected goal involvement per 90 minutes for Arsenal players, and then I've got it again for Man City players. The only difference is I've chosen the season numbers for Arsenal and the career numbers for Man City. The reason I've done that is mostly because of Mahrez, because he hasn't played a huge amount this season and his numbers are down, but they're usually pretty good. I know it's not necessarily a fair comparison because will Arsenal players keep this up, etc., but I'm just trying to get a point across, right? So bear with me. So you look at those numbers. De Bruyne's career expected goal involvement is 0.66, and obviously we pay a premium for that because he's done it over many seasons, but you can see how good Odegaard's season this so far this year has been, 0.63, so that's really good. You look at Foden, 0.59, very similar to Saka at 0.57 this season, although he has penalties as well, so that probably makes him an even better option. But the point is, how many times have you said to yourself, if Foden was completely nailed, forget De Bruyne because he's expensive, but if Foden was completely nailed on, I would own him. If Mahrez was completely nailed on, I would definitely own him, right? You've said that a lot, and it's true. I think the same. Now come back to those Arsenal fixtures. If you had a nailed on Foden or a nailed on kind of Mahrez, and they had those fixtures, would it put you off? It probably wouldn't. So I guess the question is, why is it putting some people off going for Arsenal players? I know Jesus was a factor for some people, and maybe there are some concerns that they just can't keep these performances up, but they are playing so well right now. And the big difference for me is you've got Odegaard, Saka, and Nketiah, Martinelli. They're pretty much nailed on right now. Right, you just don't expect any of them to miss any games. I know Smith Rowe might be back soon, so he could take minutes off Martinelli, and that would be a bit of an issue. But I don't see him starting anytime soon. Why would Arteta want to change this if those players are fit and available for every single game? Because they've just been so good. So if you are someone that is unsure about going for another Arsenal player because of the fixtures, I wouldn't let it put you off too much. I'm not saying you have to go out of your way this week to completely change the team that you've just decided on to go for an Arsenal player, right? Because the fixtures are quite tough on paper, but if you've got a spare slot at any point, I just don't see why you wouldn't go for any of them. And to be honest with you, it's a bit knee-jerky from myself, but I'm already thinking, do I need Ben White? Because I've already got Marcel, like in my team, I've got Martinelli and Saka already. Could I go for a third Arsenal attacker instead at some point? Maybe I could, like especially with a five-man midfield. If that was Odegaard instead of Mount, I mean, that would look pretty good. And obviously, they're not going to go through every game where all three of those players get attacking returns, but they're going to get enough to prove them to be excellent value. So I know a lot of you are probably already just on Arsenal players, but I just wanted to kind of make that Man City comparison because I talked about it last week and a few people said, well, they're not Man City players and Foden can go and get a hat-trick at any point, but that can happen. But you want players who can be consistent value over a period of time, and that is Arsenal players right now. So if you're not doubled or tripled up and you need to make a transfer soon, there's no reason you couldn't go for them. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Odegaard and all the other players I've discussed. What are you doing with Wilson? Are you one of the kind of over 100,000 managers that has already bought in Mitrovic? Leave me a comment below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new around here. I'll catch you again tomorrow.